Hey guys, Bobby here, and this is going to be a little bit something different. I have been a longtime strategy game fan ever since I was a kid. I remember playing Rise of Nations, Civilization, Age of Empires, Command and Conquer, just so many different games as a kid. When I was younger, I used to spend the summers and part of the school year at my grandma's house, and I would always install these different strategy games on the computer downstairs and just play them, play the heck out of them. I've always been a big history buff, big history fan, so that caused me to, take an interest in those kind of games, especially those that focused on, World War II, World War One, anything like combat focused. And so today, what I'm doing is I wanted to play this game, Making History of the Second World War. The Making History franchise has been around for a long time. The first one was released, I believe it was in 2007, if I'm correct. It was called Making History of the Calm and the Storm. It was a really great strategy game, really unique, um, from my perspective at least. And it spawned the Calm and the Storm Gold Edition, which had additional gameplay scenarios, additional content, additional like updates to the game. Um, they released a sequel. It did pretty well to some people. For some, it didn't work. I never gave it a fair chance until later on when it actually ended up being a pretty decent game. They made a game called Making History of the Great War, which focused on World War One, which was something that had only been touched on in the modding community of Making History, not by the official creators of the mods. Um, this game focused on the First World War and the different aspects of that war and the intricacies of their diplomacies and nations and such. And the cool thing about the franchise is it's been less of a like military game, less of a like resource strategy game. It is those things, but it's also an economic simulator. It's basically you basically have to manage your resources of your nation so that you can wage wars, so that you can wage, trade, you can do diplomacy, you can do things. Um, and so what happened was the original creators of the game series, Muzzy Lane Software, were either bought it or sold, I don't remember which, to Factus Games. And check the credits here. Factus, right? Doesn't even have it in here. But yeah, you see him. Muzzy Lane right there was the one who sold it. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Factus Games. Factus has done two games so far. They did this one, was their first, the Making History of the Second World War. And I'm not too sure. They might have worked on Great War, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But the first game of theirs that I played was Making History of the Second World War. I gave it a chance, and at first I didn't like it. I did not like it as much as Gold Edition. The Gold Edition was the standard to me of what you expected from the Making History franchise, so far at least to me. I didn't really care for the sequel enough to replace playing Gold. And so Second World War was my natural stepping off point because it just made sense. The Great War was good, and the Second World War is kind of based off that engine and that style that they departed from the original games. But I've always been more focused on the Second World War than the first, so it just made sense to me. Other than that, what we're gonna do now is I'm basically, this game's pretty complicated in a lot of ways. There's no real good tutorials or guides online that I've found. The fandom for this game isn't that large. There's a Discord server. I'll actually link that. If it's invite only, I'll check. But if I'm allowed to invite people, I will make sure that I put that in the description. The old games had a forum, and I used to be a frequent member on there back in the day, back in like 2009 when I had first discovered the game as an 11-year-old. And I did my thing on there. Eventually, the community died down and the forum shut down. and you can only find it now on using like the Wayback Machine. You can go look at screenshots of making-history.com. It was pretty cool. The modding community was pretty big. They interacted with us a lot. The forums were popping, and they had even switched over to a new forum a couple months into my being a member, and that ended up being the forum that they had for the rest of the time. But it was a pretty fun game. It was a pretty fun community, and I really enjoyed it. And I wish that community still existed. Um, it's kind of hard to tell who exactly in this community is left over from the original. Not sure if there's any. I'm kind of curious on the overlap, but either way, I definitely want to build the franchise, build the community around the franchise, and hopefully, me doing videos on it could, help spark something at least. It also gives me an excuse to play this game and do something a little bit different and creative with it. So I guess for this video, because I'm definitely gonna do more videos than just this one on this game. I think for this, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna start up a game, and kind of give an overview of what this game is like, what you do in this game, and what a typical game looks like. There's multiplayer, there's single player, which a little tangent here. The one of my favorite memories about playing the original game was we actually had to use this application called Hamachi to chat while we gamed. We used Hamachi, and there were passwords, there were server rooms. We posted on the forums like, "Hey, who wants to play a game? We're playing 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, whatever it was." And you'd have to join these Hamachi servers. And if the password was wrong, you'd have to message people and frantically like this was Skype was around, but for some reason we just didn't use Skype, or it wasn't. I can't remember if it wasn't popular enough. Like, at least to me, I used Skype, but it just wasn't the cup of tea for the community, I guess. So we used Hamachi. But now we have Discord. Now we have Twitter, like the internet, like YouTube. There's so many different Twitch. There's so many different things we could do that I think, once I get a webcam, I definitely want to stream this game. Once I start my Twitch up a little bit more, I would love to stream this game because I think there's definitely some potential in like building up this community. But yeah, I think I'm gonna. So that was the point of what I was getting at. Is the multiplayer aspect. We would use these Hamachi servers to talk, but we play multiplayer together, and it's a turn-based game. And the way it worked in the multiplayer was each player would do their thing, and it would be based on turns. And you'd have to sit there and wait and see what happened on what each player did, and you have to react. And there was a chat, and I'm pretty sure some of the people had microphones. I didn't. I was like 11, so me chatting with strangers on the internet was still kind of a new concept to me. I got to know these people. I considered them friends. I loved these people, as much as you can love somebody you don't personally know, but you know what I mean. I got to know these guys, and these guys were legends. Tabas was probably the one that I got along with the best, at least from my perspective. Part of me now likes to think that maybe he was just being kind of sarcastic back at me because he knew I was a kid, but who knows? Tabas, if you're out there, hit me up. I'd love to chat with you again. And anyone else, if anyone who does play the Making History games sees this or was from the old community, hit me up. I'd love to chat up again. That'd be great. Love to see what's going on. I'd love to play the games again with you. I'll set up a server to play Gold Edition again. That'd be incredible. But yeah, I think the way that the multiplayer was just so unique and so much fun. It was just great. You could just do so much, and once you built your country up enough, like, and you knew what strategies to use and what not to do, you could really just weigh heavy down on people. It was kind of crazy how effective that strategy was. But not to go into much more of a tangent, let's get this started. So you go to single player, of course. These are a bunch of different mods that I've either created or downloaded from the Steam Workshop. There's all kinds of different mods. I will say the modding community for this generation of the Making History games doesn't seem to be nearly as involved or as nearly as in-depth as the previous one was. The previous one, there was so much quality and so much craft and time spent in it, and I'm not sure how much of that has to do with the editor being less cooperative now than it used to be, in the old games, or if it's just less of a focus on that from the development team. Who knows? But either way, there's two official scenarios in this game. There's Building for War, which takes place starts on March 1st, 1936, kind of as the preamble, like do you want to build up your country for war? Because obviously this takes place during World War II. What ends up happening is some form of that. And then you have the last days of peace. Starts August 11th. Basically, this is if you kind of want to skip the build up, you want to just get to a more accurate 1939, Germany's about to invade Poland, start the war kind of scenario. Countries a little bit more built up. Some of them are. The major ones are. A lot of the individual nations aren't. And to me, that's one of the we're gonna play Building for War just to kind of, you know, show it off a little bit. One of the coolest things to me about making history that I think set it apart from some of the strategy games that I had played in the past. Um, you'll probably notice a lot of Hearts of Iron 4 and Hearts of Iron in general concepts to this game or similarities. While that's true, it's a lot different. It's a lot different. You'll see why. But it gives you the 8 major nations um, that you can play as. You have the Empire of Japan. You have France. You have Germany. I'm gonna have to blur out the symbol there, of course, if I want to make sure this can play in Germany and other areas that's banned in. But luckily they have this, so you only see it on the flags and such. That's gonna be interesting in how I'm gonna edit that out, but we'll see how that works. Then you have the Kingdom of Italy. You have the Republic of China. You have the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States. You have all of the big countries and major players in the war. China maybe being one that's a little bit less seemingly important when you look at the map of the game, but in reality they're pretty important. But what you can do is you can play as any of the other nations too. Any of them. You can play as Abyssinia, Ethiopia. You can battle against the Italians if you'd like to and try to hold on. You can be Austria. You can be Guatemala. You could be Danzig. You could be the Irish Free State, the Kingdom of Afghanistan, Romania. You could be Iraq. You could be Egypt. You could be Portugal, Saudi Arabia, Turkey. You could play Switzerland. You could be Persia. Some of my favorite games, one I love playing is the Chinese Soviet Republic. This one is one of my favorites to play as because you can play as any of these. And the strategies, that uses different countries can vary so much. Um, like you'll see when I go into the map, but China, the Chinese Soviet Republic or Communist China, they only get one region at the beginning. They get one city, and based on their I'll show it to you once I get in the game. But I'm gonna play as Germany just because I like Germany. I'm gonna turn the fog of war off just for, actually, just because this might be harder to manage. Actually, the editing out shouldn't be too bad. I'm gonna keep Germany just because honestly, Germany, in terms of easiness, like Germany is probably the easiest nation to play as, just because they're built to industrialize, they're built to build up their military, their technology is already pretty good, and once you invest in that, it lets you open up so much and so much more effective equipment and technology, and you can bum rush straight to nukes if you'd like to. And I say straight, the earliest I've ever managed to get to it is like late 1943, and I think that was like the United States, and that was with me. I basically only researched the technologies that were required to. Nothing else that wasn't like either immediately necessary for whatever I was doing, whether that was invading countries or waging against Germany or whatever, or other situations that I needed it. Like there's certain technologies that build on each other, and I'll kind of show you that as we get into this. But the other options, fog of war, you can have different details of models. I just do full because I have pretty good. I have a 1060 graphics card. This game isn't very graphically intense that much, but there's different game modes, quote unquote. Basically, it's just what determines who wins the game. There's a turn limit. It's about 700 turns. You can keep playing after that. It doesn't force you to stop. You can keep playing for as long until your nation falls. And even then, you can save your game and then load back into another country and just take over something else. And that is one of the most unique things about this game that I love is it lets you save every turn, and you can every time you load out, you don't just load back in as your country. You can load in as any country, and you might be saying that you can use that to cheat and change things to help you out. While that's true, it's a single player game, and that doesn't help happen in multiplayer. So, and one of the ways that I look at strategy games a lot too is it's a lot like role playing. It's a lot like choosing your own story. There are events and certain things in this game that you see that you have to follow along with, and you don't have to follow along with, that you can follow along with. But you can not do those things. You can refuse to do historical actions. They have consequences. Other nations will react to you based on what you do, but you don't have to do anything. You could be a benevolent Germany if you wanted to. Most people choose not to because it's so much fun. But you can do autosave. The game crashes frequently, especially once you get late game. Past like turn 300, it's pretty hard. I've been past 1,000, 1,100. Actually, I'm one of, and we also have difficulty. I typically play on normal. Sometimes I put it on a little bit hard, just to get myself. But I'll just do normal for right now. And I'm gonna start this process. We're gonna load this in. Basically, you can read this if you'd like. A lot of the major countries have descriptions. Some of the small ones don't, but it just depends. Basically, as Germany, what you can do is... that's not the point I was going to make. I was going to make the point about Communist China. I've played as Communist China before, just to kind of try to recreate the Chinese Civil War and, do that kind of thing, because I just thought that'd be really interesting. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult to only have one region, one city, and a limited amount of financial capital. Luckily, one of the features that I'm going to talk about in this game that's really interesting and really unique, I feel, really helps with that and kind of makes it possible to play as smaller nations. Just like in real life. Alright, we're back. And so, this is how the game, you can play with the tutorial, and it's pretty informational. There's a lot of nuance that gets missed, and a lot of strategy, and a lot of tips and tricks, and things you need to worry about, and things that you don't necessarily need to worry about too much that it focuses on. But, it's important to play with at least first if you haven't had any familiarity with the game. If you've played any of the previous ones, you'll pick up with it really quickly, but, just keep that in mind. So we hit begin game, and so it starts off with this kind of like territorial map. There's different maps that you can see. My favorite to use is the political map, just because it's based on, your country's color and its territory, and it's easy to see, what's going on. This is the default view of the map. You can kind of tilt it a little bit, I believe, if you'd like, but I don't really do that too often. The models will even move around if they're moving through territories. The flags wave. The ships, if they're moving, will have different animations and such. Look at that. There's even smoke. Look at France. So that's pretty cool. You got the entire world. Just to kind of give you a big overview. So obviously you've got Europe, you've got Iceland, you've got North America. Over here, you've got Mexico, you've got the South America, you got all the different islands in the Pacific, and yes, you can take over all of them. You can take over all of them if you'd like. You have Australia, you have China. China itself is split up. There's several different warlord factions, similar to real life, just like real life. The Chinese communists over here. This is the territory that you start off with when you're Communist China. You have one region, and you have to take on blue, all the blue, that's China. Luckily, these guys are not hostile, and neither are these guys. This is Tibet. They're still free at this point. Free Tibet, by the way. Don't care how that affects me. And then Japan's kind of got some puppet states, which I'll explain in a little bit. But, basically, just as a quick little aside here, the strat here, you basically either have to wage war with these guys before the Japanese take them over, or what I like to do is I take over the Ma clique, because it doesn't really affect the Chinese too much. All it really does is it leaves you open on three fronts instead of just one here. And the Chinese have a lot of troops, but they're mostly militia. And the way that troops and soldiers work in this game, and these armies work, is they have different strengths, they have different attack figures that weigh against you in combat, and that affects how they do. And militia are not as well trained. They don't have a lot of attack points. They defend decent, but not as good as a cavalry would, or as a actual trained infantryman, like this Japanese guy. This is a infantry 2. That's the second level of infantry, and they have 12 attack and 12 defense, as opposed to this guy who has 1 and 4. And there's a lot of factors that matter in terms of combat in this game, but that's just one of the many ones. But yeah, normally I take over this, I take over Tibet, and then I start taking over these warlord states. In a way, because basically at that point you're spamming and rushing to build as many troops as you can to challenge China before Japan takes over too much of China. Sometimes China actually fights back and beats Japan. A lot of the time Japan eventually ends up beating them and conquering most of this. If you're smart, you're able to take over enough early enough, and usually when that happens, China manages to beat back Japan. You take China over, and if you do it early enough, before they ally themselves fully with Germany, and if before Germany has invaded the Soviet Union, which they almost always do in some form or fashion, you can even challenge Japan. I have a game where I'm like 500 turns in. At that point, I've already taken over all of China, aside from this little area, the Xinjiang Clique, which is actually a puppet state of the Soviet Union at this point. Hasn't been transferred over yet. I've actually managed to take over all of Manchuria, and I'm invading Korea at that point. So it's definitely possible to play as a smaller nation. I've even played as Persia over here. I created an entire Persian Empire where I took over most of Turkey, all of Saudi Arabia, into Afghanistan. I took over some of this area. Like, it was big. I've played as Saudi Arabia, Iraq. It's possible to play as small nations. So kind of back over to Germany. This is the setup you kind of start with, is Germany. And let me just kind of talk about some of this stuff on the map, or on the the screen really quickly. Starting from the top right, these are your different capacities for movement. Every troop or unit that you move in this game requires some kind of infrastructure to move them. You can't just, you don't just get to walk across open fields all the time and get there super quickly. Look at it like this. You got this 10th Army right here, right? And look, they even have names. It's kind of cute, whatever you want to do. They want to move to Westphalia. It's going to take 1 turn. You add on Hesse, it might take 2 turns. Okay, that's fine. You add on Franconia, that's 3, and then you add on Upper Bavaria, that's 4. Basically saying, and each turn is a week in the game. So, roughly it'd take about a month at this time to travel here for this troop. I think it's less factored on realism necessarily, and it's more factored on balancing gameplay and balancing, because honestly, depending on how fast your troops are and how fast the infrastructure that you build up is, you can conquer France in 6 weeks. It is possible. You just have to have overwhelming force and be kind of lucky about where they've placed their troops. Because every country has their own AI, and they all behave in certain ways, but sometimes they behave differently and they react differently based on different events that you do. And sometimes you'll play a certain nation and you'll make certain choices, and sometimes what typically happens, like in the instance where, the Spanish Republic ends up with a civil war happening around July. Basically, what's going to happen is the nationalists are almost always going to win. I've seen the Republicans win. I've also seen different variations where Germany helps them, Italy helps them, France helps them, Portugal helps them, and the Soviet Union helps them. All kinds of different stuff happens. And sometimes playing as France, something might happen completely different because I, as France, didn't do what France normally does when you play as Germany. The more you play as the same nation, the more you see the same things happen. But if you play as Italy, something different might happen. You play as Poland, you might get invaded by Germany and the Soviet Union. You're probably going to lose, but it's possible. I think you could succeed as any nation here, It just depends on what your definition of success is and what your definition of, you know, you really have to play kind of the narrative a little bit. You wouldn't want to, let me cancel this. You know, sometimes, like as Persia, what I did one time, I waited until Germany had invaded the Soviet Union. They had taken over all this territory, right? So what I did is I took advantage of that. I knew the Soviets weren't going to be focused on me, and they hadn't allied with the Allies, because generally in this game, the Soviets and whatever allies they pick up in puppet states, they don't ally with the Allies in a traditional alliance sense. They're more aligned in that they're fighting Germany, and that kind of the AI works in tandem a little bit. You know, I've seen them give military access before. It's very rare. They usually have a pretty negative opinion about the Soviets. Um, but it's possible. It's definitely happened. Maybe that was a glitch, but or just something working against it. But I was able to take over a huge swath of territory just because I took advantage of it. I've done that before when the Nazis or the Germans have invaded England, and basically, it kind of goes into a point that I'll talk about later. Basically, though, any colonies or puppet states or any region that you control that isn't your native land, once you lose all of your homeland, you are done. Your colonies and puppet states and protectorates, they become independent, and they have to sue for peace with, the Germans or whoever conquered them. And what you can do then is, because generally they don't align with each other. Sometimes they fight each other, but usually you just have a bunch of different independent states that you can fight. And due to the most powerful nation in the beginning of the game is the UK, just because of their colonies, their navy, and just their general power everywhere. Mostly because everyone hasn't built up yet. They fall in the way. They fall behind the Germans and the Americans. Sometimes the Soviets. The Soviets typically don't build that well. They fall a lot to the Germans. It's really based on how Germany does. Germany's kind of the central figure in this game, just because, just like in World War II, they caused it and they started it. It's the same thing. Like, they end up starting it here most of the time. But back to this, yeah, these are your different ways that you can move your troops. You can move via roads, you can move via rails, via ships, and via the air. Different troops require different things. Rail is obviously going to be faster than the road. Shipping, moving ships by sea can be very fast if you're trying to go, far distances. The air and moving troops by air can be very effective if you really need, to help out in combat. And it's also good for your paratrooper units and any glider attacks that you want to do, because they do have gliders in this game. I don't use them very often, because there are a lot of things in this game that you don't necessarily need to use if your only goal is to conquer everything. But there's a lot of flavor content in this game that you can use to kind of roleplay a little bit and kind of make up your own stories as you go. So back to this. This is nuclear bombs. This is how many you have, pretty much. You can develop the bombs via technology, which I'll get to. And it basically just gives you a count of how many nuclear weapons do you have right now. This is your arms. Basically, it's what supplies your troops. Every unit in an army that you have has a resource, requirement that they require. I'm trying to find it. Actually, it's because it only shows up in combat. But basically, if they're not equipped with enough arms, like if you don't have enough supplies, you'll see the demand. Our demand right now is 0 because we're not in a state of war, and we're not fighting anybody. If we were, we would require more arms, because doing certain actions like attacking, bombarding with artillery, or bombing with ships or with planes, costs arms. It costs bombs and explosives and all kinds of stuff, It's very intensive. And you have to develop those. You have to build those arms or trade for them. Fuel powers your ships, powers your vehicles. Steel is a resource you use to build certain units. Coal, metals, oil, and food. Food, surprisingly, food is important to prevent your people from striking and from rioting and eventually revolting and causing strife, civil war, and coups. which can happen. It happens in a kind of unique way that I kind of want to expand it on a little bit in future installments, but we'll see kind of where they go with it. And over here is your money, gold. The original Making History games used more of a dollar amount surplus, not surplus, but um, like numerical value based on um, like you're balancing your budget and how much you're coming in. Like, oh, you're $500 billion in debt right now, and you make this much per turn or whatever. This game kind of just goes off gold, and it's kind of a simplification of the system to make it way more accessible and way easier to figure out what's going on. Germany starts off pretty in the debt hole, but they start off making a decent amount of money due to their due to their coal, due to their industry, all kinds of stuff. Over here is kind of like a taskbar, if you will. It kind of tells you what's going on in your game. This is global reports. All the important events that happen in the game show up here. You can even edit and choose what shows up. Some of these I turn off just because I don't need to know every time it happens. Like when my army recruits somebody, you can turn on every time you build an infantry troop or any kind of unit. It will tell you. I don't really care too much to that level because I build so many units because it's kind of one of the major factors of this game. And you can even separate it by your government. See, right now we have a radicalism. These are the different types of ideologies that they could be. Our combat penalties, any national MPU growth, which MPUs are basically what you use to recruit troops and create food, and it affects a whole lot about the game. We're at peace. We're not at war with anybody, and we're fifth. In the world rankings, we're fifth. We're first in technology, fourth in influence, fifth in the military, fifth in production. Pretty good, honestly, all things considered. Diplomatic infrastructure, recruitment orders, trade offers, engagements, combat reports, stability, and back to that. I leave it up most of the time. Kind of just depends on what people like to do. I don't like to miss things. You get pop-ups in the middle of the screen, but sometimes you miss it. Sometimes you click through it and you want to see what happened. Down to here. This is how you end your turn. These are the different maps. You can go by empire. So with Germany, this is Germany's homeland. This is the puppet state of the Rhineland demilitarized zone. If you click on this little... So basically, okay, think about it like this. Any unit, any region that's owned by Germany or any nation, like if you go to France, it's the same. Italy, it's the same. You see? If you go to anything with Germany and you see the flag, you click on it. It brings up Germany's government menu, which is also right here. Basically, this tells you all the information about our country. We're a great power. These are our rankings. We're a fascist state, clearly. This is our government support. Now, you might be saying, wow, negative 78%. That's not good. We're -9 because of our taxes. We have a 35% level right now. We get a revenue of 8,200, which is good because right now we have a surplus of 6,700, which means, we're making a lot more money than we're, spending right now. Our culture is 100% Germanic. That's good, I suppose, if you care about that kind of thing. We have a 59 million population. This is how many MPUs we have. Manpower units, basically. It's even based on our culture, too. So, like, if you look at certain troops, let me find one. Maybe there aren't any. But when you build troops in certain regions that have different cultures, like right here in Lower and Upper Bavaria, Bavarian is the nationality, not German. Bavaria is just a region of Germany, but they, feel strongly about themselves. I think Prussia's the same way. Maybe not. Could have sworn. What about Danzig? What are they? Are they Danzigers? Could have sworn that's what it is. Yep, they're Danzigers. That's alright. Alright, I could have sworn Prussian was one of them, but maybe that was something I saw somewhere else. Ethnicity, 100% German, okay, cool. Religion, 51% Protestant, 49% others. Cool. But yeah, there's war wariness, which I think they program that in right now just as kind of a, hey, we're wary about war because, World War One, the Versailles Treaty, we're bringing ourselves back. And it kind of builds up with something that they talk about in the next turn. We're +10 for our demographics, which is good. And we're minus 50 because of our finances because we're in the hole. Basically, the further in debt you go, the more you're going to be affected by it. This ends up going away pretty quickly once you get out of the negative. And we're corruption. Corruption occurs via a lot of factors. You can actually buy influence in certain puppet states to gain their favor, and you know you can also buy influence of other countries too, and that adds to corruption in their government and yours. Over here is your government policies. You can increase your taxes. So, like, if I want to do 100% taxes, I'll make a lot of money, but everyone's gonna hate me, and it's minus 35 for that. So I would have to, you know, be careful about how I do that. I can raise my education funding, which I always recommend if you're able to afford it. 100% education funding all the time. Why, you might be asking? It affects one of the most important things, your research success rate, which I have found to dramatically increase how fast I'm able to research the technologies that I need to help me develop nuclear weapons, develop, you know, heavy tanks, battle tanks, infantry Unit 6, like jet planes, jet bombers, all kinds of cool technologies, ICBMs, get into the space era. Like, there's so many cool things you can do with technology that it just makes sense to increase that. Social welfare wow, I couldn't even speak. Social welfare programs. Um, this increases your population, which increases your MPUs. I always try to put this up around like 30 or so. If I'm able to afford it late game, I put it up higher, but propaganda I usually lower just because in real life it's effective, but to me it's not so important that it matters to spend so much gold on it. But I leave it up just kind of for the you know. And as you can kind of tell, these four things kind of support the different radicalized parts of the society, and what you focus on kind of determines who radicalizes and who doesn't, which is kind of cool. And you can also spend, it's per PowerPoint that you have, which we have 11,000. It's 1 gold, so 1% would cost or it's 1 point is basically 1 gold. Maybe it's 1/100th. It factors out basically that it's really expensive to try to combat your corruption, and it's just not very practical. It's very effective though, and if you can afford to, late game it makes sense. You go here, it talks about your research. Basically, machine age, pretty good. Success rate 74.8%. That's good. This is affected by your education funding. It's affected by your research facilities and your tech level itself. These are available projects. There's another tab over here that I'll go over that in detail. Trade agreements that you have. These are all the things that we're selling to people right now. Diplomatic influence. You start off every game with having a historic relations with every nation based on all kinds of factors. Mostly real ones, that, are important. Czechoslovakia, regional disputes. Certain things can affect it, like we claim the Sudetenland, right? We believe that belongs to us. So, me and Czechoslovakia have a dispute. So, if I go to them, diplomatic relations are strained right now. And we're minus 25% because we'd start off with 5%, like, oh, we're fine. They don't mind us. But because we have territory that they claim, or they have territory that we claim, which I could let go of that dispute. I could, say I don't claim that territory if I wanted to, but I'm not going to because Germany clearly wants the Sudetenland at some point. They're going to be mad about that. So, and that's fine. I get it. But I'll take this as a way to look at the menu of what you can do on other nations. You can declare war on them. You can cut diplomatic ties, which strains relationships with any other allies, and it also can affect, you can't do trade with them, and they might get mad and declare war on you. You can request military access, which basically just lets your troops move through them. You do this to smaller nations if you need to use their territory to get to somebody else that you're fighting. Depending on who you are, you do this, or you just invade that country and take them over too. Kind of just depends on what your philosophy is that game, I suppose. You can grant them military access, which, tip here, one way to gain a little bit of extra favor, and what I do to kind of butter up to countries that I either want to ally with or I want to, to not declare war on me, is you can grant port access. And I'm going to do this. And it's kind of funny because Czechoslovakia doesn't have any ports. Germany letting Czechoslovakia have access to their ports doesn't really do anything. And I'm thinking about it. The only thing that I could imagine that would matter, and I don't think that the trade system works this way, is if we did have a trade access treaty, and if then they could transport goods via my ships. Maybe that's something that they could add in later, like in a future game. I think that could be kind of interesting. Maybe if they did one that's set in a little bit future, maybe Cold War or modern day. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. But it's kind of funny because it gave me +10 because I gave them military access, air quote. It's kind of cool. I'm gonna cancel that. But I had a military access treaty with them, so it added up. So it was nice. You can propose trade access treaty, which basically just means that their trade and my trade can move through each other. You want to have a trade access treaty with as many nations as possible because otherwise you're not always able to trade with people. If you have ports, you can trade with any country that has ports. But you can't trade with a nation that doesn't have ports if you don't have access to that area. So, it's kind of important to have that. You can propose a trade agreement, which I'll kind of get into once I get to the open market area. You can request alliance, which most of the time the nation you're trying to have an alliance with isn't going to align with you unless you're a bigger nation, an influential nation, a powerful nation, or someone who kind of lines up ideologically with you. There are certain events in the game that happen to kind of push you in the direction of having different alliances with different countries. But it just kind of, it depends on what you're going for, really. And then you can declare an embargo, basically saying, hey, we're not going to trade with you anymore. No more trade agreements. No more trade access. Nah. You can do this to, put some influence on a nation, and if they do something you don't like, if they're at war with the country you don't like, it's going to have repercussions. They're not going to like you either for it, so be careful with it. And you can propose a territorial transfer. So, I could ask for the Sudetenland if I wanted to. They're going to reject it, because why wouldn't they? But I could. And depending on the nation, let's say later down the line, me and Italy are invading France. And they happen to take over this territory, which generally I take in the war. In most situations, Germany ends up conquering all this and then forming a little puppet state of Vichy France, who, based on the way the game's mechanics works, is independent and not a puppet of the Nazis, which allows certain things to happen that wouldn't be allowed otherwise, like Japan taking over French Indochina, and then also being allied with the Nazis and not being at war with them then. But, I digress. Basically, Germany could then be like, hey, give me that territory that's clearly mine. And Italy would most likely say yes because they're allied with Germany or they're at least in a good, relationship with them. Like if I go to Italy right now, we have a +25. That's awesome. And it grows over time. There's certain events, certain things you can do to increase your favor with nations. Specifically Italy, but also many others too. And these are government policy actions you can do. You can do this on any of the nations. You can you can ask to receive, or you can offer financial aid. This is used on smaller nations to gain their favor and to hope that they'll give you better trade deals, hope that they'll give you military access, hope that they'll join your side, they'll fight in wars for you, they'll not declare war on you, turn a blind eye to stuff, that kind of thing. You can fund political action. You do this at a national and regional level. How effective this really is, is up for debate. But if you're trying to cause trouble, the function's there, and you can fund a coup attempt. It's pretty difficult. It's pretty difficult. Doesn't happen that often. And depending on which ideology you use, it can change the success rate, the detection threat. It also depends on how much you spend on it. Overall, it's a cool feature, and if you don't really care about what other countries are saying about you or care about you doing it and what that nation thinks of it, you can do it. And I've actually, done it before where it's pulled it off. For like 10 or 11 turns in a row, I spent 100% gold on a revolution in Germany as America. And it happened. They launched a coup, and it worked. and it was crazy to see. And it's cool to see that it actually works and it isn't just fluff that they throw in. But yeah, that kind of covers that menu. Um, the other menus over here, there's different maps. Other than that, there's a demographics. There's a region status map. There's a diplomatic map. There's a defensive infrastructure map, resource maps, atlas maps, supply maps, trade maps, and scoring maps, including alliances, ideologies, just everything. It's kind of cool to look at, honestly, sometimes. If you go here, this is the military section. This is our maintenance level. You can go between general, partial, mobilization, medium or low readiness, or none. That determines how much you spend on your military, how fast you can kind of mobilize everything together to fight a war in your arms and your MPUs. This is your morale, your food shortage, and anything else. You can upgrade all your units at once that are available to be upgraded, and these are your demands. Military is not demanding any arms right now because we're not at war, but we need a certain amount of food. We don't have a lot of food right now. Here's the thing about food, and it's been this way in every single Making History game. It's necessary, but the benefits are outweighed by the advantages of not worrying about it until the late game. Because also an issue with the early game is that it's almost impossible to find any food for sale because people haven't developed, and people I mean nations, haven't developed the infrastructure to sell their food yet. Once they do that, you'll find thousands of units of food for sale, especially if China is in any situation where they're powerful. India does this a lot too. A lot of the colonies, African states as well. Basically, they sell off a lot of their food in the late game, and you have to wait. The penalties are unfortunate, but are pretty much outweighed by the benefits that you can just not worry about it and kind of focus all your MPUs, because it does depend on your MPUs. You focus all that on your military, because you can essentially use your puppet states that you form, which I'll get into in a moment. You could essentially use those guys as food producers, resource producers, finance producers, essentially. I'll show you what I mean in a minute. But this gives you kind of a breakdown of your military based on the kind of units you have. There's all kinds of different units in this game. There's land units, there's artillery units, there's air units, there's ships, and this is just your manpower. These are the different nationalities and how many available MPs we have. These are also our casualties. Sad. The world forces, so looks like the Soviet Union has the most powerful land force. What about militaries in general? The UK, the Soviets, the United States, the Empire of Japan, then Germany, then France. So we're kicking their butts already. Then you go over here. It shows off all the groups based on the categories. These are individual ships. These are naval groups. That's the only distinct difference, because, you'll have different ships. And a lot of them will have different names too. So, did I already pass it the battleships? Pre-dreadnought battleship. I click on it. Oh, never mind. I can't. Go to the first battle fleet though. Click on the ship. It's the Schlesien. It's the Schleswig-Holstein. It's the Admiral Graf Spree. Like, it's great. The Emden. The Königsberg. The Krishan. Talking like Sean Connery. I'm going to stop that because that was embarrassing. Not really, but basically, some of the ships have names. It's kind of cool. Nice little detail. British ships have that same concept. Let me find one. Maybe. Okay. You get the point. So, that's the military section. You go over here to the diplomacy section. There's a lot to take in on this map. It's in alphabetical order at first. I like to go by world PowerPoints. Basically, these are all the world governments. And any country... And so the way the territory works in this game, there are basically puppet states. Let me show it like this. Sorry, I just want to find the best way to describe what things are. Basically, there are your nations, your empires. who control their nation but also other nations. And when they control, like, let's say for the British Empire, you go to their empire, they have colonies, like British India. It's a colony, as opposed to a great power. You go to, let's look. You go to Nepal, it's a puppet state, meaning it's got its own autonomous government that makes its own decisions, but it's under the purview of the British Empire, and what the British Empire ultimately does is what Nepal will do, because they're in the alliance automatically, and they don't get to leave unless they declare a revolution or a revolt, which can certainly happen and has happened from time to time with every nation that has a puppet state. And then if you go to like Gibraltar, it's a colony. I want to look for. I was wanting to look for a protectorate. Yep, the territory of Basutoland, which I'll take you to because why not? It's right here. This is a protectorate. Basically, you can change. There's certain things that colonies do and certain penalties that they have and what they produce versus a puppet state versus a protectorate. Almost to the point where I almost question why you would ever have colonies other than just the role-playing factor of countries had colonies. That's kind of how that works. And I don't know. Maybe it's just me adapting a more modern version of colonialism where having puppet states and using them for resources, using them for money is kind of the same thing, just in a roundabout way. I digress. Back to Germany, though. So, you have these empires, and then you have the countries that don't have any territories. Any nation that has empire after it, like the American Empire, for instance, we'll look at theirs. Oh yeah, this is the diplomatic relations menu. I don't think I actually managed to cover that one. I forgot about it. But shows if they have an alliance, the name of the alliance, or no, not the name of the alliance. That's just who their allies are. They're the leader, and these are their puppet states that are in their alliance: Cuba, Nicaragua, Dominican Republic, and Panama. Hawaii and Alaska, I think, are both colonies at this point. The Pacific Territories are protectorates. It's that kind of thing. U.S. Virgin Islands, etc. So that's kind of cool. There's different levels of territories, and you have different control over that too. Dependencies are all the colonies and all of the protectorates. And it shows the different owners and such. It shows the different ratings that they have. It shows the status of the military access treaties and trade access treaties with us. It shows our relations, if they're neutral, if they're strained, or positive, or the like. This actually shows our influence over them or them's over us. Our government system and our status. Great power, regional power, and if you go down far enough, you get to minor nations, and that's when you start seeing the puppet state, and that's when you'll see, get all the way down here to the Kingdom of Yemen. They're the least powerful country, apparently. Kind of seems that way now. These are all the empires that have regions. These are all the alliances. We're technically an alliance because we have the Rhineland demilitarized zone, which will come up here shortly. And these are all the wars that are happening. Chinese Soviet Republic against China, Guangdong government, the Hebei Chahar Political Council, and the Shantung government. I probably butchered those names, but these are the puppet states of Republic of China. Just how it goes. And then Abyssinia is fighting against Italy. And if you click on this, it's kind of funny. You can actually go here and support the war. You can declare war on them. And you can also see who else supports it. Like, Kingdom of Yugoslavia and Greece support the war in favor of Abyssinia. Italy doesn't have any support for it, which makes sense because they're just aggressing on a nation. Kind of an interesting thing that you can do, and it kind of influences the power you have over other countries. And then we go to the production menu. This is a lot to take in, but essentially what I'm going to do, because you can look at yours and you can also look at your, not only just your puppet states, but your colonies and your protectorates. And like the puppets, you can't control; they're controlled autonomously. Your colonies and your protectorates, you control. So I'm going to start with cities. You have three menus. You have factories, you have your recruitment facilities, and your city list. The easiest way for me to kind of grasp what's going on here is I sort by type because it sorts all the different types of things that are being built. It says the city, and it says the type of building. It says what the orders are, how many turns it's going to take to complete that order, default factory order, and it shows the supplies that it needs, the amount of tax that it requires, and the amount of income that it provides. This all factors out into this basically, and when we get to um, our economic page, which now that I mention it, I don't think I even covered. So I will return to that shortly. Sorry to jump around a lot here. I've never done a video like this specifically before, so you know, just kind of bear with me, I suppose. So after the empire map, we go to nationalities. These are all the regions that we own, and it has all the information about the radicalization, culture, religion, ethnicity, population, MPUs, the rate that they produce population, the world power points. If we were to lose them or gain them, someone else gains them, etc. We can transfer governance to any of our other regions. If we wanted to, we can establish a new government, a colony, a protectorate, a puppet state, an independent even. If I did independent, what would happen is they'd be independent of me. I don't control them, but they'd be allied with me. And at that point, they'd be free to leave if they wanted to. Government programs is like I'm sending aid to Bulgaria and it just kind of lists what's going on. This also shows my funding of political factions. You go to the economy. This shows, this is the change from last turn because it's the first turn. There's nothing there. This is what we're producing, importing, exporting, total demand, supply rate, stockpile. It shows our estimated income and our spending, net balance as of last turn, the distribution, our projected spending and our projected income, all that stuff. All right, back to production. So I sort by this. Aircraft factories is the second step. There's an aircraft hangar that you have to build first. But you can produce all these different things. You can produce bombers, fighters. You could idle. If the reason you would idle, and you lose money for it, but the reason you would do it is if you don't have the resources to produce it. Because if you don't have the resources to produce these things, you won't be able to produce them, and you just stall. And you don't want to do that. Machine tools, you can build anti-air guns, howitzers, field artillery, etc. Textiles or consumer goods or arms. They each provide different benefits and require certain things. You can have fuel, kerosene, petrochemical, synthetic fuel. Synthetic fuel is a way to create more oil, which as Germany is important because you need your oil for the tanks to keep rolling. And you need those to take over Russia. You need those to take over England. You need those to take over America and the Middle East and Africa and get more oil. It costs coal. It's pretty expensive in terms of losing out on coal, but especially as Germany, who makes a whole lot of coal just right off the bat, it's just one of those things that you just kind of have to reconcile with. Then you get down to your shipyards. I didn't cover. So these are refineries, distilleries, mechanized mills, and tool factories. You get down to your shipyards, you can build shipping capacity, which is how you build rail capacity. Aircraft parts, we haven't unlocked it yet, but you're able to build air capacity there. Rail capacity is built here in steel mills. You can also build all kinds of different ships. I typically just stick to standard battleships because I like to build up a strong navy that way. Dealer's choice, really. It just depends on what you're going for, really. And as Germany, especially, you kind of have to just nail them right on the head with a really powerful navy that you have built up this whole time. Otherwise, you're kind of screwed. Especially by Britain, incredibly by America if you're not smart about it. You can produce rail capacity, steel, or wrought iron. I've never really found a purpose for wrought iron. Steel is the way to go unless you want rail capacity, which you do, and I'll kind of get to that in a moment. And then you get down to motor works where you can build automobiles or you can build tanks. My recommendation is to always be building tanks, always be building planes, always be building things if you can. You don't want to waste a turn, especially as Germany, especially as most nations. And the more I'm thinking about it, what I'm probably going to end up doing is releasing guides for each nation that I play as and like specific strategies that I think work better for certain ones. And I'm going to have my own playthroughs of the nations and such like that too. Just what I think is most effective, because you don't want to waste turns, because especially as Germany, at least, you have a certain window of time before America builds up too powerful. The Soviets build up too powerful. France and England become too much to deal with. You wanna hit them early enough where you still have a significant advantage and you have the surprise. If they get to build up and be at war with you at the same time, they know what to expect and they're gonna be ready for you. Especially America, they're gonna come in crashing and mess up all of your plans. Then we get to our recruitment facilities. It shows how many MPUs each station can recruit from. It's based in every city. These are the levels. There's military academies, there's barracks, and level 1 is training camps. Not every city starts with one, because if you go... Sorry to go forward a little bit too much. Basically, I could create an infantry 2, for instance. It takes 5 turns. I could have this repeat, or I could have it just once. I can also have them when it starts up, and when they get recruited, to say, hey, go to Upper Bavaria immediately. And they can move. They could take the quickest land route, which might be via rail, might be via air, whatever it might be. Or they could just move naturally. It just depends on what I want them to do. But this might come in handy if you needed to, if you're at war and you really need to send troops to the front or to a specific area to gear up for a war. It's pretty easy that way. Now we're going to go to the city list. A lot of information here. I'll break it down. This is how many factories are operating and supported. So the first number, like in Berlin, there's 3 factories operating. I could have 4 because it's a bigger city. Every city's a little different. Some can house 4, 3, 2, or 1. I believe some even have 0, some of the smaller cities. That can hamper a lot of smaller nations from being able to do a lot, which is why imperialism and attacking other nations is kind of required in this game. If you're a smaller nation. It's possible to do it diplomatically, but you'll kind of see what I'm saying. This is the research facility level. This is whether it's a port city. This is its level of recruitment, its health center, its energy producers, its fisheries, its meat producers, its canneries, its food production level, its maintenance cost, its tax level, and its income. These represent if you've built that type of facility and what level it's at. And based on what level it's at, it affects these numbers. It affects what you're able to build over here and over here. And, like, for instance, you can also sort by if it has it or not. These two, Königsberg and Breslau, they don't even have training camps. So I would want to build training camps. It's like a basic for me. You want to always be producing infantry. You always want to have infantry be produced every single turn. I'm not going to do it this just because, this is for show. This is for a introduction to this game, pretty much. And just a very brief overview, really. So there's that. Basically, to me, you always want to have your training camps. You want to always be at least at a barracks. And as you progress, you want to slowly start leveling up to military academies and then military bases, which is 4. Other than that, to me, the most important thing at that point is to see which cities that you have that aren't completely maxed out. And this is really up to personal preference. I like to try to have a significant number of each type, because you want to have a lot of ironworks, which turns into steel mills, and goes further, because each one's called something different because it advances with your technology. You want to have a lot of ironworks because you want to have a lot of rail capacity, because you want to be able to trade a lot. And to trade over land with other countries, you need railing. That's just required in trade. You want to have, if you go here to Hamburg, it's a dock. You want to have dockyards. You need a lot of dockyards for two key reasons, especially as Germany, but in general. You need to have a navy. If you don't have a navy, the UK will destroy you, and the US will destroy you. Even Japan can dominate you from time to time if you don't have a good navy. Germany needs a strong navy to be able to even land troops on British shores, to even be able to get to Canada, to invade the United States, to conquer the rest of the world. You have to have a navy. Also, you can produce shipping capacity. You need shipping capacity to trade, especially in the late game. If you're in the late game and you have enough shipping capacity and you're negative 1,000 food because you have so many troops all across the world conquering nations, but you have enough shipping capacity, you can just ship in 1,500 food and you're fine. And yeah, it's going to cost you a lot of money, but at that point you have so many territories that you can mooch off of, and you're producing and selling so many resources that it's all good. There's so many things to take into account. You want to have distilleries because you want to have fuel, and you want to be able to like help produce more oil too with synthetic fuels. You want to have motorworks because you need tanks, because tanks are very effective and very strong units, and because they're very fast and they help you just blitzkrieg all over other countries, especially as Germany. Personally, I find aircraft hangars to be very important as well for the late game. Now, planes and bombers, fighters and bombers are important and they're useful, and they serve a really important purpose, especially at bombarding units and softening them up to make it easier to conquer them, especially if you're trying to conquer them quickly or in a timely manner. The reason why in the late game you want them is the way, as you see that this works is you have to have a factory to produce a unit, and to produce bombers you have to have a aircraft factory or aircraft hangar or some sort of facility, one or the other. That's just the second level, and it's kind of cool because it's like 2 smokestacks. If you get the idea there. But basically, you want to build a lot of aircraft hangars because by the time you build nuclear weapons, you have nuclear strategic bombers, and you have jet bombers. You need to be able to produce them. And if you want to have that advantage over people, you need enough of them to where you're not gonna, be vulnerable to them too. Meaning you need to be able to produce a lot once you're able to, and you don't want to waste time. So that's why I like to have at least 8 to 10. Which can be hard to manage. Sometimes in this game, with the nation that you start off with, doesn't have a lot of open industrial slots. The United States, for instance, has so many that it's ridiculous, and you can pretty much become the most powerful nation in the world, just like in real life, and it fits. It makes sense based on that. Germany's is really good. It's really good at focusing on creating a strong military. You just have to focus on, do you want more tanks or more aircraft? At least from my point of view. Not everybody has to do that, but what I found to be the most effective is that. And I like to have at least 8 to 10. And, you also have to factor in, if you conquer a region that has an aircraft hangar, you can then use that aircraft hangar after a certain amount of time wears off, that the penalties go away and it's not extreme. So, it takes more time, it takes stability away, it takes more turns, it takes more gold, income, etc. But once you do, having 10 or 12 nuclear bombers built at the same time, yeah, it might take 20 turns, but at the end of 20 turns, you have 12 new nuclear bombers. That's a lot of damage that can be done there. Metalworks are important if you want artillery and if you want ballistic missiles and ICBMs later on. I tend to not focus on them as much, but they're important to have also for anti-air guns, which I waited way too long to care about because they are very important, especially if you want to avoid being bombed, into oblivion and to where it starts affecting you. And I said Metalworks. It might be Tool Factory. Actually, I believe Tool Factory is the first version of Metal. Or I think that's the first version of Tool Factory. One of the things about this game that'll mess you up sometimes is if you have a free slot and you already have, let's say I already had a Motorworks here, it would give me the option to do another Motorworks because I have a free slot, or it would let me do the next tier of Motorworks, which is kind of cool because that means, like in America and Detroit when you play, typically I have a lot of, I'm pretty sure you get to build 2 or 3 factories from scratch from the beginning. So I just put a lot of motorworks there, kind of just as inspiration from real life. That they built a lot of cars there, they built a lot of tanks there. It makes sense. But you can kind of recreate that in the game too. Once you take care of making sure you're building troops and making sure you have all of your buildings that you need, or if that city doesn't have a slot to build on, I think the next most important thing is universities, is whatever technology is next. Because the most important thing to me is fast tracking your technology. Your success is going to be dependent on what's going on in the game and what's going on with the technology that you have and what you're able to build. So the faster you do that, the more you're going to be able to advance in the game and the more you're going to have success, pretty much. So that's the cities. The infrastructure is another whole thing to look at. Basically, it's every region. And it has its type: plains, forests, hills. Germany has just those, but there's all kinds. Like if you go over here, there's infrastructure. They have mountains. You see, I'm sure if we went to Bavaria, it's probably got mountains, right? I don't know. But we go back here. Basically, you can do different projects, and it's based on. So let's go to this region over here, Nuremberg. If we look at their, what am I doing? I'm trying to find the best way to show you this. I guess this works. Basically, you can do a bunch of different projects, and it's based on what they have. They have trench works, which is a basic level of defense. You have your air defense to help stop not only bombers and fighters, but also shoot down, recon planes and other stuff. Fortress, it's a more heavy-duty, like, fort, obviously, style of defense, not your typical just trenches. It adds more bonuses defensively, and it's very important to have if you're trying to hold out against, like, an invading army. Your coastal fortifications prevent nations from being able to invade you as effectively from the sea, and that has a lot of benefits as well. Your air base depends, and your air base, if you don't have an air base, you can't have an aircraft hangar to build on. So if you have a city that's built in a place that doesn't have an air base, you can't build an aircraft hangar there. You have to have it. You also can't have your air forces land there at all. You have to have an air base there. Some people like to have them everywhere. Some people don't. I put them where they're necessary. Sometimes it's not worth the energy to even worry about it, but everyone has their own opinion on it. This is the maintenance tax and the world power units, obviously. This is the transportation level. This is also very important because this affects the rate that people get taxed at and how much money that you earn from them. This also affects how fast people can move through the territory and how much food you're able to make from your farms. And so you can, based on your technology, build up higher levels of farming and all these other different things. And this affects your country in so many ways that will matter long term if you're trying to move your troops around to invade countries or just defend yourself or do trade or do diplomacy or do any of those kind of things. But maybe not as complicated as the last menu just because there's only one menu. But then we go to resources. A little bit less complicated too, but still important. These are all the resources that I control. Each territory, not each territory, but a lot of territories in the game have resources. And these are coal, metals, oil. And they are these three. These are things that you can't build. You can't build any more of these. There's a finite amount of resources in theory. In the sense that there's a finite amount of resource producers. You can conquer more, and you can upgrade these by expanding output and increasing your transportation level and having MPUs to draw off from. If you don't have them, it's harder to expand. It's harder to raise it. But as you expand, and I recommend always expanding if you have the money to. And Germany actually is really good that they don't have any that won't always immediately expand. But you can also prospect. And what prospecting does is basically try to increase the amount of reserves that you can have and increase your output, which increases how much you can trade, how much you can give to people, how much you use, etc. You can also reduce output if you wanted to. I'm sure there's a functionality for that could make sense, but you could do a scorched earth policy if you really wanted to, I suppose, but that's just one option. And so now going to research. Here's the timeline. All the green ones are ones that you've completed already. It starts off very early. Most nations are way down here in the machine age. Some nations, though, like Saudi Arabia, Persia, Communist China, they'll start down in the crop rotation, factory system, agrarian reform section. You have to, like, I'm pretty sure they actually might start down here. They might, I think they have infantry weapons one. They might be at steam engines, maybe a little before. But you have to work your ass off, which means as a small nation, you have that hurdle to challenge too. Meaning, you're not even going to get to here where Germany's already at. You're not getting to here till like 1942, when Germany's already like halfway to a nuke as the AI. A human player would be almost there. It would just take another year and a half to maybe two to get to a nuke. Basically, there's a couple different philosophies with technology. You know, if I wanted to have better fighters right away, I could do aerodynamics right now. You know, go for fleet carriers, go for heavy siege guns, or I could go for national laboratories. Technology Center is the next tier of research facility, and it's better for me. That's going to be what I'm going towards. Not only because I think that's the most important thing to do anyway, but I'm not going to war yet. And I definitely plan to have fighters 3 at least, if not 4 by the time, possibly even 5, depending on how fast I would be able to do this, before I even go to war. And not that I don't want fighters 2, because I do, and I will research this, but I want to advance my research a little bit faster, so that, and have a bit more aircraft hangars, because right now I wouldn't even be able to make a lot of fighters 2 anyway. I'd probably do bombers, because I can actually do a little bit further tiered version of, bombers, as opposed to the fighters. That's interesting. Sorry, I was looking at the disk space remaining on my Audacity recording. Basically, there's, I'm basically thinking that it makes more sense to wait to research this now until I get a little bit more advanced on my education funding and research, and I build more in terms of my technology. Because you see, Germany's pretty advanced, but they also have a lot of cities that have none. So these are the cities that I would want to build universities in. This guy would want to have a research facility in. I misread that completely. Chemical lab, etc. I don't know if you guys heard that, but that was my Duolingo. I'm trying to learn German right now, which is kind of funny since I'm playing as Germany. But back to the technology. Basically, that's what I would do. I would always recommend, and kind of early on, I recommend going for these kind of top-level technologies, because they are what unlocks the next tiers. And a lot of these require certain technologies that they build off of. And the further down you get across the line, you get towards like rocket engines, and you get finally down towards nuclear chain reaction. One of the problems that people do run into, though, is you do nuclear chain reaction, but you need a nuclear lab, which you don't unlock until you do advanced physics. But nuclear labs take like 40 to 50 turns to build. So you have to unlock this, and then you have the chance to. And the problem is, a lot of the time you're already in the process of building something else at that point, because you don't want to waste turns. Meaning you have to balance that against having slots open to start building nuclear labs, because once those 50 turns are up, you want to research this. Because by this point it might take 10 to 15, it might take 8 to 15 turns to fully research that. Whereas a 15 research points might take only, 3 turns sometimes. Kind of just depends on how far along you are. And by this point, you're usually pretty fast. But then it's kind of the same thing. You have to get to there, but then you have to get all the way to engineering sciences, then to get uranium enrichment, which requires this and nuclear chain reaction. And then once you get past that, you get all the way down here to nuclear fission, which allows nuclear fission is what allows nuclear strategic bombers. Basically, what lets you get to nukes. Once you get this, and once you build a nuke, that's when you become a great power. And it's actually like a big event. The entire world has shown what happens there. which is pretty cool. I like that feature. As you see, you kind of go into the atomic age, you get to the space age. ICBMs are the last thing that you can build. You got universal tanks and weapon miniaturization, nuclear jet bombers, and you know, jet fighters, all that stuff. Basically, the start of the Cold War, essentially. It's pretty cool because this game is focused on World War II. It's not meant to take us into the future and stuff. It's meant to be a product of the time that it's based in. But that's that. And then we're going to go to the trade menu. Here's the world market. You can sort by the different resources. You can sort by the units. It's like people are buying food, meaning they're offering to buy it. If I wanted to sell food, I could. Now, if you go over here to metals, my puppet's selling 24 metals. Basically, meaning if someone wanted to buy metals, they needed them, they could. Um, and the same goes for all these. Certain things are sold more at the beginning than others. Certain things don't make a lot of sense to sell, like the capacities. It's always made more sense to me, unless you have a lot to spare and you want to sell them purely just to make a quick buck, is just to keep them and use them on other trade that makes you more money. In the long run, is easier than the cost of continuously making more and not losing all of them. You can list world market offers. You can do auto trade. Basically, you can set it up that you will buy 101 coal, and if that becomes available, do it. Essentially. Kind of turn that off, but it's possible. It's something you can do, and you can go to your trade agreements and see the other stuff that you have. It's color. It's grayed out if you haven't done anything, and it's full white if it's active. There's empire trade between anything that you're doing with your empire, and then there's global production. This is kind of useful to see what is going on in terms of production, and it's also a way to see what your puppets are doing. If I had more puppets, it would show here that they're allied with me, and it would show what they're producing. Because what you can kind of do is it shows they're doing 153 right there, right? Pros trade agreement. I could buy 150 coal if I wanted to, but I can also sell them, or I could send and request coal aid. Frequency is every turn, and they're offering 153 per turn. It's 300 gold value, and I could say it's my responsibility because it doesn't matter. I have plenty of railroad. I can request the aid. Because they're my ally, they're going to agree to it. So now I have more coal, and I didn't have to pay for it, which you can abuse. Like, I can go to financial agreement, and it's kind of broken because I can request financial aid every turn, and at first it's only going to let you do a certain amount. 5,000, okay, cool. It's kind of glitched. You can go back to it and just go up. It adds corruption, oh well, but you get 10,000 gold. It doesn't always work out exactly like this, though. Basically, what ends up happening is you only get some of that money because the game kind of recognizes what you're doing, but you still get some of it. The trick to doing it is if you have a lot of them, the actual benefit of it will kind of override the way the system kind of knows what's happening and balances out the inconsistency in how much money you're earning and how much money is actually there. Just one of the things you can do. You can relocate your capital. You can instigate a coup in the game. You can edit your nation, which is pretty cool. I like that you can do that because I know when I played as Persia, what I did is I renamed it Iran just to be, a little bit cheeky and more realistic. But yeah, that's the trade menu. It's pretty cool. A lot of options you can do there. This is the encyclopedia. It has all the information and all the stats on all the different units of the game, all the different infrastructure, all the different research, all the different things you can do in the game. And the information's there. The nuances, the strategies, the tactics aren't fully there yet, aren't fully realized anywhere. In a fashion that I think is deserving of how good this game is. And I've spent an hour and a half almost talking just about the AI and how the basics of this game work, and I haven't even advanced to the next turn. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to advance to the next turn. I'm going to kind of show it off a little bit. I'm probably going to do 10 turns, I think. And after that, I'm going to end this This isn't going to be my. This is just going to be an overview. I'm going to do a playthrough of this game here soon where I actually, play and show off my strategy and kind of show the results in my mind, my thinking, and what I'm doing. Um, but you guys see that. You guys will be able to see that soon. I'll keep you guys updated on that. This is the first event that you get. You get pan-Germanism. The humiliation of Versailles and the surrender of the German territory continues to foment nationalistic desires and a return to pre-war borders. To maintain the support of the German people, the state must pursue a policy of the reincorporation of the Rhineland, the Polish corridor, and the other traditional German lands, including Alsace-Lorraine and Sudetenland. To achieve these aims, Germany must build the most powerful military in Europe and seize the initiative. This is the will and the destiny of the Germanic peoples. Some pretty fascist, nationalistic shit right there. So good for that. I like the picture. It's cool design. It's very menacing. It's obviously got bad connotations in historical contexts. But I got a notification. Military intelligence. Poland changed military readiness to partial mobilization. This is kind of like our intelligence agencies just being like, hey, Poland kind of standing by. What's going on here? This isn't super indicative really of much. Sometimes it's useful when like the UK or France or Russia mobilizes or America mobilizes. There's actually a specific event that happens when that occurs. It's kind of a big deal, obviously, especially just due to how important that kind of shit was. But it's interesting, and it can affect it depending on what nation you are. Like obviously Poland's not going to invade Germany because they're a democratically elected country and they're not really a threat to me. But just something that can happen. Soviet Union does it the same. Kingdom of Yugoslavia does the same. Kingdom of Iraq granted military access to the United Kingdom. That's kind of cool. And then we get this part of this. Remilitarize the Rhineland. Basically, I'm not going to read it off like I did the last one, but basically the Franco-Soviet treaty ratified in February is basically trying to hold us down. Basically, Germany's saying we can't let them hold us down anymore. We believe that the military is not ready to risk war, and it's a violation of the Versailles, but we have ambitions, so we're going to do what we want to do. Gives two options. You can either send in the Wehrmacht, which essentially means the army marches in and we assume that the West isn't going to react and they're going to let us do it. Or we can pursue a diplomatic solution or at least wait for a better opportunity. Basically, this is the option if you don't want to go to war and risk it right now. It's a pretty low-risk maneuver, so I'm going to send in the Wehrmacht. And basically with that, what's going to happen, as you're going to see in the next turn, is bye-bye Rhineland demilitarized zone. We immediately annexed that territory, which we could have done on the first turn if we wanted to. It gave us the option in the menu. But the purpose of this is kind of like an event-based. It's kind of like Hearts of Iron in their diplomacy system where you can spend the points to do certain things, and with the tech trees and stuff. Not the tech trees, but the national focuses. But we received some gold from it. We annexed it. Austria and Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania got interested. And this territory is now ours. And it's funny, you'll notice if you go, we're no longer the German Empire, we're Germany. Once we have a puppet state or something else, we'll become the German Empire again. But it's just how they define us. But we now have access to these cities, and we can build a training camp there because it's our territory now. We can build factories. And it also gives us a lot of resources, like the Ruhr, the Rhineland, and the Main and Mainz are two important regions for Germany. Just because it adds in a lot more resources that are very vital for the later war effort. So that's the first two turns. I'm basically gonna skip through these and just kind of show you what happens after the first 10 or 11 turns, and then we'll kind of leave it at that, I guess. Sometimes the events appear on the right side over here. Sometimes they don't. Germany asserts power. Basically, just this kind of is like, hey, we're doing our thing. We're going to take over what we want to take over. Don't stand in our way too much. And the humiliation ends. We're going to cease being held liable to these penalties that are unjust. We are going to build up our strength. And Italian Abyssinia was founded by the Kingdom of Italy. Let's take a look at that. So, we have Abyssinia, Ethiopia. We have Italian Abyssinia, which is a colony of Italy, and they're moving in. They're taking over. Um, Basically, Italian East Africa over here. They also have Libya. It's kind of cool that they have their colonies and that they're doing their thing. We advance to the next turn, um, and we get this event. This one's kind of, it's kind of like a matter of personal preference. I sometimes do this, sometimes I don't. It really depends if I feel I'm going to go more for a maniacal, world dominating Germany or a more realistic, try to not go invade America by sea Germany, which naturally tends to lead to a sort of Cold War, hot war situation with America and trying to balance invading Britain because almost every time you invade Britain as Germany, America will declare war on you just because you're interfering with them. It's kind of like if you haven't already, like you can sometimes invade France and not go to war with Britain. It can happen. But Norway generally causes that to happen. Sometimes even invading the Netherlands will. Invading anything that gets into a certain sphere of influence with a nation, which one of these maps down here will actually, pretty sure, where is it? Nation's influence. Sphere of interest. I'll show this shortly. To answer this, basically what it does is it creates a fortress in the Rhineland. Sure, because why not? We're not gonna finish this game out anyway. But if we go to sphere of influence and we click on Germany, basically this is the sphere of influence for Germany. This is what they feel they have dominion over. It's pretty accurate to what ends up happening in real life, aside from this area, obviously. But they conquered pretty much everything else besides Italy. And I mean Hungary by proxy, Romania by proxy, but you know what I mean. But yeah, it's kind of cool that they they add that kind of stuff in. They kind of think about that sort of thing. You're allowed to. Oh boy. It's funny. So sometimes what'll happen, France will sometimes kind of try to pick on you and kind of stand up for themselves. Usually, basically, they give you an ultimatum. They're like, "Hey, you better stand down, or we're going to reoccupy the Rhineland." Yeah, good luck, France. Spanish instability. Basically, this is the start of the Civil War. There's violence between the left and the right. Give it another 3 months or so, and we'll be there. Those training camps are built. Normally, I would change those to barracks, but I'm not going to finish that out. Some countries are preparing their militaries, most likely just because of the threat that France gave me, and they're preparing in case I did go to war. But what always happens, almost always, is France stands down because we don't back down, which I don't even... I'm kind of curious what I would have to do to stand down. I'm not sure if there even is a function in the game that wouldn't just be me role-playing, but that's something to think about. It's funny that it says they have an edge in military manpower and equipment when they clearly don't by the statistics, but basically they stand down. The West Wall, where at? Oh, in the 3 areas. Yeah, sure, why not? Let's go to the next turn. That's basically the first major event that happens in the game. There's a lot of different events in the game that happen, especially with Germany, mainly just due to the different historical focuses that they go down, obviously. It tells you when your trade agreements are done. It tells you there's a military coup in Bolivia, and they try to bring change. There's a couple different countries that happens to. And I've seen it happen in Argentina, which surprisingly, or maybe not unsurprisingly, has a pretty high historical relationship with Germany. Would they do an alliance with me? No. But basically, Argentina will sometimes have a civil war, and a nationalist Argentine state will form. And if you support them, which I've done before, they'll take over Argentina and basically be your ally. They'll be a fascist power in South America, kind of building up their military. And I've used that before as a jumping off point to conquer South America, which will instantly cause the United States to get involved, just like if you invade Canada. But if you've somehow invaded Canada without taking over England, or if that somehow didn't cause America to invade you. Brazil does the same thing in terms of a Brazil state that pops up that you can support. Um, Brazil's a fucking mess to deal with in terms of how many territories they have and stuff, but it's one thing you can do. That would actually be a pretty interesting playthrough to do. I might actually have to playtest a little bit. I'm telling you, man, I think playtesting all the different scenarios and different ways that you can play this game could be so interesting. You know, maybe I just got to find the right community members that enjoy that and build on that, but, you know, it's kind of like a pet project I want to focus on. This would be really interesting for me. But yeah, we'll do a couple more turns. There's a specific event that I want to get to, and then I'll kind of leave it at that. This is kind of one of the flavor ones that doesn't really do a whole lot, but kind of helps. It's purely just for flavor. Government support increases. Meh. You can build fortifications. Yay. Build fortifications. Yay. It lowers their historic relations with France, though. Because us building defenses is like, oh, what are you doing? What are you doing? You trying to build up forces? No, we're not, France. Don't worry. Definitely not doing that. Alright. So yeah, our global reports have a couple important things. Sorry, it's like 11 o'clock. I worked early this morning. Working on a Saturday is not very fun. The German restoration policy. Basically, this is kind of being like, hey, look, Germany's got a lot of claims. We're going to make this happen. The Western powers don't want a world war, but Germany's going to make stuff happen. We can force our weaker neighbors into returning lost territory. And that's what happens. There's a lot of events that you can do to gain a lot of territory. A nationalistic anti-communist faction sees power in Greece, pro-German leaders. As you see, that increases our relations. Pro-Japanese, buffer state, a greater German Reich. Political situation in Austria shifted dramatically since 1933. This is the first option you have to take over Austria. Austria right here. You can do it multiple ways. You can delay it, which is generally what I do, because it gives you time to build up negotiations with Italy and avoid the possibility of war. But you can do it now. It can cause an early French-Italian response. The Italians even might go to war with you or be mad at you. But if you support their colonial investments in Italy, or not Italy, in Africa, and you support them in their wars, they will support you, and you can do it a little bit earlier. There's a benefit to doing this just because you gain 3 more cities and more resources, and, you know, just the benefit of having more territory earlier on. It's really just a matter of preference. You can do it either way. Guess I'll do that just because I'm not actually planning on finishing it out. I believe there's one more. I think this is the end of turn 10, so it's saving the game. It's the autosave. This game crashes every now and then. It's a pretty frequent crasher, especially later on. So I would highly recommend saving often. You don't have to save scum if like things go wrong. That's, you know, I'm not gonna blame you if you did, just because, you know, something didn't go the way you wanted it to, and you felt like something, you know, silly happened. If you want to go back in time and replay a level by reloading a earlier save, you know, depending on the kind of game you're trying to play, that might be necessary. Or you can kind of roll with the punches. It kind of depends on what you're going to do. I think for my channel, what I'm going to do is I'm kind of going to try to have a rule where I don't go back on saves. I'm going to kind of have to roll with the punches as they come. But, alright, there's that. There's been 11 turns. So I think I am going to kind of wrap this video up a little bit. This is a long-ass video. And I'm sure this is going to, you know, be a little bit different than the kind of videos I normally do. But I think playing this game going forward could be a lot of fun. I hope some of you guys enjoyed this, and I hope more people, you know, join in this community and, you know, give this game a chance. I think this game is really fun. I think there's a lot of potential, and we've only really scratched the surface. there's so much nuance and stuff that you'll see once someone's actually playing it instead of just explaining it that I I can't wait to get started with it. So if you guys enjoyed this, leave a like, leave comments down below, give me thoughts. Name a nation you want to see me play as. Any nation. I'll give it a chance. I'll do a playthrough as any nation you tell me. No matter how much I'll cry. So, subscribe for more and be on the lookout for some more videos coming from me soon. I appreciate everything, guys, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.